everyone. I'm Jim Longworth, and welcome to a special voter education edition of Triad Today. Over the next half hour, I'll be speaking with two of our area congressmen, Ted Budd and Mark Walker, about a wide range of issues that affect all of us. But first, a word from Todd Hall, president of Triad Federal Credit Union, who's helping to bring you this special program.
At Triad Federal Credit Union, we understand the role each of us plays in ensuring good government by staying informed. Our democracy is strengthened when local leaders can offer insights on the issues that matter most in our communities. We support Triad Today's commitment to providing local congressional leaders with a forum for legislative updates because of its importance to the political process. I'm Todd Hall, president of Triad, and we hope you enjoy this special presentation.
Thanks, Todd. And now let's get started with our program. Ted Budd is in his second term, serving the 13th Congressional District. He and his wife, Amy Kate, and their 3 children live in Davie County. Mark Walker has represented the 6th District since 2015. He and his wife, Kelly, live in Guilford County. And welcome to the program, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this.
Here.
Thank you, Jim.
Let's start out with an unpleasant topic, and I think we started out the same way when you were back here in March. Speaking of which, just since you were here in March, and you might have better figures than I do, but I looked this up. Since you were here in March, over 260 more people were killed in mass shootings, including the 30 that were murdered in El Paso and Dayton within a 12-hour period. Yet once again, guys, Congress seems to do nothing about extending background checks, nothing about banning military-style weapons. Are you ever going to take action? Or, and I don't mean this in a flippant way, are we just all going to have to go out and buy bulletproof vests? I mean, where do we stand, Ted?
It's a great question. I think something we can all agree, probably here and even across the aisle, is that these are absolute tragedies. Nobody wants these to happen. I'm a father of 3, as you mentioned earlier. I want my kids to come home safely. We want our neighbors to come home safely if they've gone out shopping, like those in El Paso. So we all agree on that. What we disagree on is how to go about it. There's a couple of bills that I know that I've co-sponsored. One of them is the TAPS Act. It looks for behavioral threat assessments and training law enforcement to look for problems before they happen. When you look at what happened tragically a year and a half ago in Parkland, there were over 40 indicators, 40 interactions with law enforcement. And so we have to also look at a local level and what happens there. There's also there's other bills as well, the Mass Violence Prevention Act. And if we could get these to come up for a vote, I would certainly support it. I've already co-sponsored it.
Mark?
Yeah, I do believe that we are doing something, Jim. We've passed multiple pieces of legislation. The Stop School Violence Act that hardens some of their schools. We've got the Fix NICS Act that cleans up some of the background check. In fact, just recently here in Guilford and Rockingham County, we saw a $500,000 grant go to protecting schools and hardening those as well. So we are moving something. Where the line is how far do you go before you start encroaching on that Second Amendment, and where the line is. Here's a common fact that here's a fact that we don't always talk about. There are more people killed by knives than there were by long guns in this past year. That it's always something. Any mass shooting is too many. But let's also worry about all those different cities. One weekend in Chicago, there were more people killed in one weekend than all the mass shootings this year. Both are problems. Let's continue to work, but let's also know where those people's rights and the lines are.
I'm just curious. There's no right answer to this, but before we go to our first break, I'm just wanting to get your thoughts. What do you think is causing the increase in this kind of violence? And you guys would understand this because you're both young, but I'm 100 years old, and in the old days, if you had a disagreement, you'd fist fight. Now people are pulling guns instead of pulling punches. I mean, what's wrong, Ted?
It's a lot of different things, but I think Mark was right to talk about the problem with knives, and that really means it's a people problem, not a device problem. In England, 85% increase in knife violence, so it indicates it's a people problem. We have problems with drugs. We have problems with our families. And a lot of this goes back to the kitchen table. And there's not that interaction in a lot of families like there needs to be. And what we need to be as better neighbors.
I believe it is the breakdown of the family unit because young people sometimes are not taught to deal with adversity or difficult situations. So all of a sudden when you have this everyone gets a trophy mentality, the first adversity you see may be as an older teenager or as a young adult. I think we've got to be able to train our next generation behind us that part of adversity is building the character. You don't go out and solve it in an extreme manner, you work it out. And yes, I grew up like you did. We fist fought one day, but we were best friends the next.
Right, and guys, to end on sort of a controversial note, I know you sort of skipped over this in your answers, but I can't let it go entirely about this ban on assault weapons. And as a disclaimer, people know that Ted has a gun shop and shooting range. It's a very fine operation.
Why don't you go ahead and say the name? That's advertising for
That's right. That's right. What is the name? Go ahead and say the name.
No, it's Pro Shots.
Pro
It's in
Shots.
Rural Hall, just north of Winston-Salem.
And I've been there, and so much for that commercial. No, but seriously, guys, I mean, would you be opposed to a ban on assault weapons? I mean, forget that question. What's wrong with a ban on assault weapons? Who would it hurt? Who would it hurt, Ted, quickly?
It hurts law-abiding citizens. There's over 30 to 40 million of them out there, and we see them used very tragically in just a few instances. So, I believe there was a study, it was a government study done several years ago after they ended the ban on assault weapons and realized that there was no statistical difference between when there was a ban and when there wasn't.
10 seconds.
More
Mark.
people were killed by fist and personal weapons like clubs than there were so-called assault weapons. We want to monitor it. We want to make sure these guns are not getting into people that are unhealthy, but let's be careful banning them across for our first citizens across the board.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about elections and securing them. We'll be right back. Special edition of Triad Today, brought to you in part by the good folks at Triad Federal Credit Union. We are with Congressman Ted Butt and Mark Walker, and we want to, in this segment, talk about elections. A growing number of Republican Party chairmen are canceling their state's 2020 primary in order to protect President Trump from competition. I think it's Arizona, South Carolina, Nevada, and Kansas. I don't care what party you're in, guys. This, to me, this is voter suppression. I'm an independent. I wouldn't be able to vote for a Republican choice who might be running against the president if somebody wipes out the primary. Does this worry you that primaries get canceled like that, Ted?
It's not a concern because in the Constitution it really leaves these procedures up to the states. So if the state party opposed that, I'm sure that they could push back on this, but so far I see it's within their constitutional bounds.
Mark.
I don't disagree too much outside of these bounds, except I wouldn't be here today if they were able to cancel the congressional district primary. That's important to me, that people have a chance to exercise that. There's nothing illegal about it. I just would want the opportunity that if I chose to run, that I would have an access or an opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. An increasing number of elected officials say we should get rid of the Electoral College altogether, let presidents be elected by the popular vote alone. How do you stand, Ted?
Again, it's states' rights, and they need to be able to vote as a state together. It also prevents tyranny of the majority. I think it's a good system, and I think we should continue with it.
The Founding Fathers were genius once again in designing this, that the folks in a smaller community, an Arkansas, an Idaho, a Delaware, would have the same kind of impact on a place like New York and California. I believe it's very thoughtful when they put this into action, and I hope that it continues certainly for our lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Securing elections. Now, let's go to that for a second. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but to date, I don't think the president has ordered his intelligence agencies to really look into and prevent hacking and that type of thing into the 2020 election. So I'll turn to you guys and say, is Congress doing anything to make our 2020 elections more secure? Ted?
One bill that's already passed the Senate is the Deter Act, and it would actually deport anyone that's a non-U.S. citizen that's here infiltrating or trying to overturn our elections. So I think that's a good bill. When it comes to the House, I plan on supporting that. There's other things related to blockchain security, which is probably the future of against cyber hacking, which is also a threat, especially as we move towards electronic voting. I've done some bills to experiment with our servicemen and women overseas to allow them to use blockchain to vote absentee in the state of West Virginia. We want to expand that to other areas and make sure it's secure, but it's very promising.
And being transparent, Jim, it is a problem. It is something I can tell you as the ranking member for Intelligence and Counterterrorism Subcommittee, this is an issue that's ongoing. We designed or designated $380 million back to the Electoral Assistance Commission to make sure that older machines are not vulnerable like maybe they have been in the past. This is something that we have to monitor. Russia, North Korea, we've increased those sanctions already because of their efforts, but it didn't happen in the last 4 years. This has been going on some time. In fact, the Obama administration was warned multiple times and took no action on it.
Well, the tampering is a different thing from hacking. Tampering to me is like this flood of social media ads where they try to incite blacks, try to incite whites, try to incite old people, try to incite women with these things and just infiltrate with fake information. That's got to be a concern, right?
Well, we weren't as aware in 2016 of what was happening. Now everyone seems to be aware and is forewarned is forearmed, and we have that in 2020. So So I think the fact that it's been talked about so much makes us more aware of the influence campaigns that are affecting all of us.
We don't know how many are private sponsors versus state sponsored, but Russia and China hack us anywhere from 20 to 20, or attempt to hack us anytime 20 to 25,000 times per day. It is something that we must keep our guard up.
All right, congressional district lines, as you know, there's a lawsuit by some Democrats and independents that they want to change those in North Carolina. If they're successful, who knows what's going to happen to the March 3rd primary. But very quickly, my question is, who should be responsible for drawing up congressional lines, Ted?
Oh, it's always the state legislature. And that's historically what it has been, and it should be for the future.
Shouldn't it be nonpartisan? Or?
Well, how many nonpartisan besides you, Jim, what can we find out there?
A committee
of challenge.
one.
Listen, the Supreme Court has ruled on this multiple times in Virginia and other places that those in charge of the state legislature, which is the people of that state has sent to rule them, should be able to draw those lines.
Final thing before we take a break on this, since we're talking about elections, I'm going to call this the category tainted money. In other words, if I send a check to you guys, it's from Jim Longworth, and after the fact, months later, you say, oh, Jim Longworth, we just found out he gave us a check for our campaign, but he's a racist, or he's in this organization that's, you know, a terrorist organization or something. What do you do with money like that? Because the case that's now sort of in the news is this Robin Hayes case, former congressman who's embroiled in all sorts of things, allegedly. And you and a bunch of other guys have been touched by this because this money was floating everywhere. Do you give this money back to the source? Do you give it to charity? Do you give it to other candidates? What do you do?
You know, in cases like that, usually a good best practice is to give it to a charity and let them benefit from that, and just distance yourself from that.
Yeah, the maximum somebody can give to both campaigns is $5,800. The gentleman involved in that, we gave that back to charity. That is the money that you're specifically campaign. In the words of Ronald Reagan, he would take money from anyone because it was going to further what he felt like was the best agenda for the country. But there are some cases that you mentioned, the best practice, as Ted just described, should be giving it back to charity.
All right, good deal. When we come back, we'll talk about education, jobs, and health care. We'll be right back. Back now on this special voter education edition of Triad Today, brought to you in part by the good folks at Triad Federal Credit Union. And we are with, of course, Mark Walker from the 6th District, Ted Budd from the 13th District. And guys, thanks once again for being here.
Sure.
Thank you, Jim.
Mark, let me start with you because I want to touch on education, employment, and some other things. You have something called an A-Plus Act. What is that?
Yes. What it does, it tries to get Washington, D.C. bureaucrats out of the local Board of Education, local school boards. Doesn't take any money from the national level, even though 10% only comes from the federal, keeps the funding the same, but it lets the decision-making go to the most localized place that you can make it, whether it's the superintendents, whether it's the local school board. Let them have the money, but also let them make the decision, because who knows best than the school board, the parents involved in those education decisions, as opposed to DC bureaucracies. We think we can get some traction. We hope to get it across the line sometime this year.
Ted, let's talk about, I believe you sent me an email one day about something you were working on with apprenticeships.
Absolutely. The virtual apprenticeship tax credit. It gives up to a $2,500 tax credit to businesses that are setting up virtual apprenticeships and really helps fill our workforce demands. It's one of the major challenges when we're out there. We are at a 51-year low on unemployment, and we need more people to enter the workforce, and very low debt, low cost options for very rewarding careers. And so we think this will be a big help.
So, you know, there's Mark working on a plan to help the local schools. You're working on a plan to help people get into the job market through apprenticeships, which I think is a great program. Now let's talk about a specific one. Mark, there's something you're working on called Prison to Prosperity. What is that about?
My dad was a pastor. He was a chaplain as well, and I can still remember going with him to these prisons, sitting on those bunk beds and talking to some wonderful people who had made a decision or made a poor decision along the way. America is a country of redemption, and we wanted to have something that would allow these folks that are coming out of prison to reduce the recidivism rate by allowing a track, which has to do specifically what we were just talking about, apprenticeships, allowing the government to be involved, to be able to help grease those skids and work with the private public sector to make sure these folks would have a chance to re-enter to society, but not just turn the keys over to them and say good luck, but have a ramp-up place where they could get back into the job market.
All right, let's turn to health care for just a second. I guess I'm going to ask the obvious stupid question, where are we on it? Because I know that a lot of folks in the Republican Party wanted to replace Obamacare entirely. Others, even in the Democratic Party, wanted to come up with some kind of hybrid thing. Republicans in Congress came up with something that was just stupid for a while. I'm not looking at the two of you. I'm just saying in general it was stupid. Nothing seems, I mean, do we even have a plan right now? Where do we stand, Ted?
Well, one of the things I've done is introduce the Flex Act, which codifies some of the administration's efforts to allow associations to offer health care plans to small businesses. We think that's one good thing. The second is it allows individuals to buy low-cost, short-term, short-duration health care plans, and we think that gives people more choice. It lowers their cost, and we think it can increase their quality of their care.
So what are we looking at, Mark, like an a la carte thing now? Is there a comprehensive thing, or are you going to go with separate kind of plans?
Well, there's no one size that fits all. You know, Obamacare was supposed to be, Obamacare is the law of the land. But evidently, it still isn't good enough. We want to spend another $32 trillion to continue and increase. The bottom line for me, is it about choice for the individual, or is it about more control? If it's about more choice, let's go down that path as opposed to more government involvement.
And when you were here last time, of course, my big question was, will Medicare for all work? And I think both of you said no. I guess you still stand there, right?
Absolutely. If seniors wanted to make sure that they keep the Medicare as they know it, I would be careful going into this Medicare for all.
Why are you looking at me when you say seniors? Just because I'm 40 years older than both of you combined. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about immigration and some other things. Stay with us. It's a special voter education edition of Triad Today with our special guest, Ted Budd, Congressman from the 13th District, and Mark Walker, Congressman from the 6th District. And gentlemen, let's start out on this segment talking about immigration. Let's focus on immigration. By my calculations, and I've read several sources, we're going to have about 1 million plus illegal immigrants coming into the country each year, coming over the border. What, if anything, is Congress doing to stop the flow of illegal immigrants, Ted?
You know, I've been to the border. I actually was there earlier this year, and I really saw the actual problem. We're actually going and working through the Department of Homeland Security and working in the 3 countries in Central America which are key, and it's Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. That's where USAID would actually be helpful there to stem some of the original problems. We're making sure all the way up at the border, you know, it's a 2,000-mile border. We're making sure that they have the technology they need, the person power to cover that. So we're covering the whole spectrum. And when it comes to asylum seekers, we're actually making sure when they leave their country on a journey for asylum seeking, that they check in with the next country. They will check in with our consulate there.
Yeah, I want to get to the asylum thing in a second too, but Mark, take a whack at this thing in general. What should we be doing? What are we doing?
Different countries have learned the game system. When I was at the border last month talking with the different agents, there's 60 different countries were represented as far as people they had apprehended. A lot of drug smuggling, a lot of human smuggling. And don't forget that America is the most philanthropic country in the world when it comes to immigration. We take in over 1.1 million. No country even comes close to that. We have 4 times as many foreign-born as we do in this country as any other nation. So it is something that's a problem, but we hope the Democrats will. You remember earlier this year it wasn't a crisis, and in the spring it became a crisis. So I'm hoping if they're acknowledging that it's at least a crisis, let's work together, let's resolve this flow of influx of all kinds of drugs, human traffickers, whatever it might be. Are there some good people? Absolutely. Is there a place for asylum? There is, but let's make sure that we're obeying the law and not just opening up floodgates.
Well, the president wants to cut back on the number of people that can seek asylum, and that piggybacks on what Ted was talking about. So Mark, while you're talking about this, give me your input on that.
We have concrete data that some children have been used 7 or 8 times to come in with different individuals. When I talk about gaming the system, adults knew that the catch and release would work if you came in with a child. We have to have tighter metrics, if you will, to make sure that that is not being taken advantage of. We want to make sure, Ted and I, the first oath that we take is to make sure that the citizens of the United States are protected, and part of that is making sure that we're controlling our borders.
Ted, the birthright citizenship thing, the president also wants to eliminate that so that a woman can't cross the border from Mexico, let's say, have a baby immediately becomes a citizen. Where do you stand on that?
Look, I think the president is right in this because it creates, unfortunately, a very bad incentive for people to come here illegally just to have a child to be their anchor for the rest of the family. We think it's a bad incentive.
Mark?
My process is until we change or to clarify what the Constitution stands, if you are born here, historically, the 14th Amendment, I believe it is, it has given you citizenship privileges. It once again, just like asylum seekers, this is being gamed, and when you realize something's being abused, then it's time to take a look at it. How do you make those adjustments long term?
Yeah, you got to be old enough to cross over the moat of alligators that the president wants to. Is that the dumbest thing you've ever heard?
No.
Can you even react to that?
No, it's not the dumbest thing I've ever
it's
heard.
Not the
Come to
dumbest
DC,
thing.
you hear me?
Not the dumbest thing. It's a serious topic, but it's weird. I don't know what he was thinking about doing that. But very quickly, I don't know how much time we have left in this segment, but quickly tell me what your sanctuary bill is about.
Victims of Sanctuary Cities Act. It gives those who have been hurt by people who refuse to adhere to detentions and they release an illegal alien. If that person creates a problem, there's a legal standing to be able to sue that municipality.
Okay. I assume you agree with what he's
100%.
All right. When we come back, we'll wrap up, have some final thoughts, and we'll be right back after this. It's a special voter education edition of Triad Today. Thanks in part to the good folks at Triad Federal Credit Union are helping to bring you this program. And a special thanks, of course, to Mark and Ted who are still with us on this. This is our final segment of the program. And I want to be, I don't know if this is adversarial or just pure political, because I didn't want this program to be political. We've talked about issues because you are our representatives, and I wanted to know what you thought about things. But I have to say, a lot of people in the media, a lot of people in politics say that Republican congressmen in particular are afraid to criticize President Trump because he will oppose them or campaign against them when they try to get reelected. So I have a simple question for you guys. And you're both big, strapping, strong guys. Are you afraid of Donald Trump, Ted?
Absolutely not. I've had personal time with him. He's been a gentleman. He's been cordial. And the more time I've spent with him personally, the more I'm impressed with him.
But you haven't gone on record criticizing him to the extent that he wouldn't be cordial. I mean, does that worry you?
No, there's a difference between style and how I may operate and substance. And I think the substance of what he's done has just been phenomenal. So I applaud his efforts and what he's done to really help our country.
Mark, are you afraid of Donald Trump?
No, never have been. I think my actions speak to that. Like when we were at the rally there in Greenville, South Carolina, and I came out the next day and talked about the send her back chant. That was something that I have friends historically that would be offensive. Not that the president initiated that or had anything to do with it, but I think there are moments where we have to separate the policy versus the personality. Donald Trump is a real estate playboy tycoon. He gets point A to point B. He may leave scorched earth, but the American people wanted somebody to go to Washington and simply get things done. He may not always do it in the most sensitive way, but that's what he's accomplished in the first 3 years.
All right. So if I can't get you to say anything really hypercritical, and then we can get on the phone immediately and see if he says anything harsh. I don't know if we can fabricate that or not. Then we would become fake news. All right, guys, before time gets away from us, I want to ask you this. What did you learn from your parents, either one or both, that put you in good stead for doing your job in Congress? Ted?
I would say I give them a tremendous amount of credit. Hard work, love your family and the value of relationships, and pray a lot.
Mark?
I had breakfast with my hero today, which was my dad. He grew up in the backwoods of Alabama in the heart of really ignorance and uneducation and racism. He taught me multiple things, but one thing that stayed with me the rest of my life is, and my younger brothers, is to love people, regardless of their political affiliation, their affiliation, their socioeconomic status. If you love people, you have a chance to be successful in this life.
What's the hardest thing about being a congressman? I know this sounds like a softball question, but I'm curious. What's the toughest thing about having your job, Ted?
You know, the calendar moves really fast, but legislation moves really slowly. And so you have to get used to that. You just have to be
relentless. You get frustrated.
Well, you got to steer around the frustration and just keep your head down and keep going to work.
Mark?
People see you sometimes just because you have an R by your name as a stereotype or one-dimensional, and somehow you wish that people could literally see your heart to be able to, from a perspective of how much that you're trying to impact the community to better it. And I feel like if we could have more of that dialogue, we would ease some of the tension. That's probably my biggest frustration.
Should Congress be a full-time operation, do you think? Because it wasn't intended that originally. I mean, we've gotten to a point where it is, and you guys do a good job and everything, and you're up there a lot, but geez, I mean, should it be full-time? Would you like to see it go back?
Well, right now we need to be in Washington. Look, we're in the district for 2 weeks right now, and there's a lot to be done in Washington. So maybe we need to work a little bit more. I'd love to be back there getting a few things done.
Yeah, and I will say before I go to Mark, as a disclaimer, we're taping this on what's today, October the 9th, because this is when the guys can get with us, and so you're seeing it a couple weeks after we actually tape it. Mark?
I believe you have to put in perspective. Ted and I have the privilege of representing nearly 800,000 people. That's a lot of needs. That's a lot of veterans. That's a lot of education issues that are constantly wanting to talk to you and meet with you, their concerns. It keeps you busy. We're back in the district this week. I often thought if the impeachment of this treasonous president was such a dire straits, why weren't we there working on that? But
You're
Speaker
joking,
Pelosi,
of course.
yes,
If we want to make sure that the president's listening that Mark just told a joke.
hyperbole.
I'll back him up on
But,
that.
yeah, exactly. But it is you stay busy, and we have wonderful staff that help us from the legislative to the scheduling to really all the components. Very proud of those guys as well.
Do you guys get enough sleep, though? I mean, I'm serious. You see people just, doing too much, and I know you're trying to go to a lot of events, but you have downtime?
Go to bed early, get up early, and go to work.
All right.
I feel it's a privilege. No complaints.
No
Guys,
complaints.
thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim.
Well, that's it for this special edition of Triad Today. But if you want to learn more about what's going on in Washington, I urge you to visit the websites of these two gentlemen, bud.house.gov, bud.house.gov, walker.house.gov. My thanks, of course, to Ted and Mark for taking time to bring us up to speed on the issues. And another thanks to Todd Hall and True Lion Federal Credit Union for helping to make this special program possible. So please visit their website as well, truelionfcu.org. For all of us here, I'm Jim Longworth. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.